Okay. I think most people have entered the room, so we can get started. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Geographic Society of Chicago's Women in Geography webinar series in celebration of GSE's 125th anniversary celebration. I'm Jill Andrada from the GSE office, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Tonight, we're so excited to kick off the series by having Lucy Stanfield join us to present Mapping Toxic Waste Cleanups, Disaster Debris Recovery, and Environmental Justice at the EPA. Lucy is a GIS specialist at the US Environmental Protection Agency. Since 2005, she has used GIS to make maps for a range of environmental programs at the Midwest office. She'll discuss her data and mapping challenges, creating web maps, static maps, and posters for public meetings. Lucy will also share her best practices while training staff for maps, data visualizations, and presentations. She is also a Geo Mentor for local schools. Now, before we get started, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end of the webinar, time permitting. All right, Lucy, take it away.
So I'm going to share my screen and tell me if you can see it clearly.
Yes, we can see it.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks, Jill. Like she said, I'm Lucy Stanfield. I work for the US EPA here in Chicago, and I'll be talking about my maps that I've been making for the past 2 decades at EPA. A little bit about myself before I was a GIS specialist. In 2005, I worked in the pollution prevention and recycling section for a few years. And then before that, I was an intern for EPA. So I've definitely worked in different programs. I interned for the research and Great Lakes offices and have been working where I'm at in my position for the last 18 years. So it's been great to be invited to do this webinar, and I hope you guys will follow along. And like Jill said, please type any questions in the chat and we'll get to them near the end. So here we go. So first off, I am a geographer. I got my bachelor's in geography and anthropology at the University of Chicago in the 90s, and then went to the University of Arizona for my master's in geography. So I am a geographer doing GIS work. That's not always the case with my colleagues. A lot of us come to this work in different ways, but it's been really fun. I've had a lifelong love of geography and maps and social studies. So this is just kind of giving you my background, like why am I doing this work? So I'm a geographer by training. I'm an information management specialist by job title. That's my federal job title. And I do a lot of trainings and speaking on how to get jobs in the federal government. And if you search geographer, if you search GIS, you may not find a job, or if you're looking just at the job title. So just want to let you know that all of our job titles in the federal government can be very general or not very specific. And so if you're a geographer out there yourself, or you do GIS work, you want to look for those different job titles. But by specialty, I am a GIS specialist. I've been doing that type of work since 2005. And a little bit about the US EPA, if you're not familiar, the mission of EPA is to protect human health and the environment. And there are 10 regional offices around the country. Our headquarters is in Washington, DC. And as you can see on the map, Region 5, our office is here in Chicago. And we work with the states around the Great Lakes from Minnesota to Ohio. That's the shaded area in orange. And we recently met, all of the GIS staff met in DC, and so come from all over the country, and we have a really good collaboration and share best practices. But that's a little bit about EPA. Where I work here in Chicago, I work in the Land, Chemicals, and Redevelopment Division, and that is an amalgam of many different types of programs, and I support staff that enact all these different programs. These programs were created as a result of federal laws. So things like brownfields redevelopment, taking formerly contaminated properties and assessing them, cleaning them up, and getting them ready for redevelopment. That's the brownfields program. We've got hazardous and solid waste management, underground storage tanks, sustainable materials management. That includes reuse and recycling, as well as food waste recovery, electronics waste and recycling, managing that whole waste stream and promoting recycling of that material stream, pesticides and endangered species, and lead and chemicals and toxics. And you can see I didn't use the words air or water, and those are different divisions that have their own GIS staff here in Chicago. So our division handles a really wide range of programs, and our staff have a really wide range of mapping needs that I support and help them with. So a little bit about one of those programs called Corrective Action, because I'm going to talk about a few of those maps, is this is a program that is similar to Superfund. If you've heard of that National Cleanup Program, RCRA stands for the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and that was a law passed in 1976. That was 4 years before Superfund. The CERCLA, the law that created Superfund, was passed in 1980. So this comes before that. But the corrective action process is for all of those companies, all of those properties that have contamination, but those are coming from facilities that are still in operation. So while a company is still operating and they are permitted to manage and handle their hazardous and solid waste properly, when they don't, that's when the corrective action program comes in to manage those cleanups and manage that remediation. And this process can take as long as a Superfund cleanup can take. We're not talking 5 years, 10 years. It could be 20 or 30 years to clean up some of these large sites. So I just want to make folks familiar. I'm not going to go through all those acronyms, but just make you familiar with what is corrective action, because I know that's not just a very common word or phrase that people are aware of. So let's get to some maps. The first map I'm going to talk about is a corrective action site, and it's located south of Indianapolis in Franklin, Indiana. We're going to zoom in a little bit because I know it's a lot of detail here. This was a map I made for the Amphenol, the former Amphenol facility. And this again is in Franklin, Indiana. And as a result of cleanups that had started in the mid-90s, this was a facility that through several former owners, the company had been dumping trichloroethylene, and that's TCE is the name of the chemical, had dumped that chemical into their sewers in the facility property, and that had migrated through the sewers to the residential area nearby. And so this was before 1983. EPA got involved in the mid-90s with cleanup, and as late as 2018, and as a result of environmental groups bringing back raising concerns of this community of Franklin, Indiana, the EPA went back and with the help of US EPA, as well as the state agency, Indiana Department of Environmental Management, did a range of sampling and testing, and just kind of showing you the top of the map right now. It's a little disorienting, I know, to not see the whole thing, but as a result of that cleanup and ongoing cleanup, there was a public meeting in 2019, and that's when I made this map. This was a handout. So we're going to kind of scroll to the bottom of the map. So this plume area that's shown here in the white hash marked area is the groundwater plume of the TCE chemical. So that was underneath these residences. I know it's a little bit hard to see. There's a residential area just south of the facility, and the chemical had migrated through the sewer lines. And then this is a chemical that residents were noticing the smells in their own homes, in their basements, coming up through their pipes And so the pink lines here on the map are the sanitary sewer lines throughout the residences. Oops, let's go back there. And throughout the area, and you can see the whole study area is shaded in orange, the orange outline. The sewer lines are in pink. And not only is the former Amphenol facility labeled, but all of these other industrial facilities that were also in the area, those were all labeled on the map. And then you can see what else is on the map are the 2 nearest schools. So this is very common for our communication and public outreach, where it's not only residences that are impacted, but schools. And so you can see the direction of the groundwater is headed south towards this creek. And so this handout had to do a lot, this map handout. It wasn't just a poster, it was also something people could take away and take back and share with their friends and neighbors and colleagues throughout the town. So, just the challenge of making maps that can convey multiple pieces of information in a very clear way with limited color schemes, that all goes into map making. And you can imagine it's pretty challenging to get that all on one handout that's in plain language too. That's not putting too many acronyms on there at once, of course. So that's one example of a map I made. This next one is also from a corrective action site. This is again a cleanup site of hazardous waste. And this is the Solutia site near East St. Louis, Illinois. And I'm going to zoom in because it's hard, I know, to see all of the dots and the points and the labels. But again, this is a multi-year cleanup. This is a map I made back in 2016. It's got a lot of data points on it. It's soil sampling at this site. But as we zoom into the top of the map, we can see not only does it have soil sampling, that's the red and yellow dots that are labeled, but in the inset map here up in the upper right corner, this is not only a corrective action site, which is that ongoing company site that's still in operation, and that's the yellow outline, but also next, if you've ever visited East St. Louis or driven to St. Louis, just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis, the very heavy industrial area. And so not only is this corrective action site here, and my colleagues in our program work to manage the cleanup and the remediation that takes years to clean up, but this is also a Superfund site here in the orange. So notice the proximity, and they're different programs and they're funded differently, but our staff work together at the region to make sure that the cleanup is ongoing, that data is shared not only across EPA, but our partners and the community affected as well. So if we look at the lower part of the map, just the challenges of showing how much soil sampling is going on. And the red dots indicate soil sampling for 3 different types of chemicals. We've got lead, dioxins and furans, and total PCBs. And several of these, you know the impacts, you're probably familiar with the health impacts, but lead can lower IQ in children, and dioxins and furans cause cancer. And PCBs are polycyclic, I'm going to mess this up again, but PCBs are probable human carcinogens. And so a lot of toxic chemicals that what we're putting all these dots on, these are residential areas. So it's very important to map this, to put all this data. We've got 3 different years of data, and we're just wanting to show, are they above the screening levels, which are different for each chemical. So again, a lot of complicated data, trying to distill that down with the boundaries, with the aerial photos for the purpose of analysis. And this map was used by our corrective action staff to work with the Superfund program, since there was such a close proximity of the corrective action site with the Superfund site. So that's those 2 maps. I'm going to switch over to some disaster debris recovery maps, which starts with this map back from 2007. Seems like a long time ago. This is a map of landfills near the sun's exercise, and suns means spill of national significance. And this is a regular, ongoing, national, multi-agency exercise for emergency response. And you can see down at the bottom of the screen, if you know anything about this area south of Illinois along the Mississippi River, this is the New Madrid earthquake fault line. And there hasn't been a large earthquake since the 1800s here, but back in 2007, EPA with 11 state agencies and other federal partners practiced and planned for what would happen if there was a magnitude 7 earthquake hitting south of Illinois, near Memphis, Tennessee, southern Missouri, southern Kentucky, right here, right along the Mississippi River. What would be felt in the small towns? What would be felt in the cities like St. Louis and even Chicago? And so as part of these emergency response planning exercises, one thing they do is plan and think out how to coordinate, after a disaster like an earthquake happens. And after earthquakes, and as you can imagine, things like tornadoes and floods, there's a lot of debris, and it can be debris from buildings, it can be debris from homes. Think of all the schools and everything that's got like computer equipment in it, all of those different types of materials that are destroyed and damaged. And so what do you do with all that debris? So this map was made of landfills, and you can see, I'm going to move this out of my way. I've got the screen sharing window there. You can see what's on this map are the different types of landfills. Landfills for holding solid waste, like where do all of our household garbage go? And then construction and demolition landfills, those are landfills that hold things like concrete and wood and drywall and all the parts of buildings that are, when they're demolished, that can go into landfills called construction demolition landfills. And then the C landfills are the hazardous waste landfills here. So you can see this is just a few states. I don't have all of them in the area. I'm not showing south of the area here, but this was the data that we were able to find for this exercise. And this really started a conversation at EPA, not only in our office, but across the country of, it would be really nice to have this data at our fingertips, ready to go and ready to map. As a result of our lessons learned meetings, they call them hot washes, that was one of the results, that we needed to have a data set, a national data set of these landfills, and also recyclers. This isn't just material that should be all thrown away and burned or buried. It really could, some of it can be recycled. So that was also the focus of EPA at the time. Let me see here. Click to my next. Okay, so here's another picture. This is of a few maps that I made for an actual response in 2010. Some of you may remember the Enbridge oil spill in Michigan. And this was one of the largest inland oil spills in the history of the US. Over 1 million barrels of oil were spilled into the Kalamazoo River, which is a tributary leading into Lake Michigan. And so this was one of the emergency responses that I participated in. I was here in the office in Chicago. We had staff out on site in Michigan, managing the cleanup, cleaning birds, cleaning up the oil, soaking it up out of the river, all the different things that go into EPA's response. And this photo really shows, where do those maps end up? We make the maps, we know our staff uses them, but in this case, this is a map showing at the time our EPA administrator, Lisa Jackson, the US Senator for Michigan, Debbie Stabenow, Michigan Governor, Jennifer Granholm, and our regional administrator, Susan Hedman at the time, all looking at these two maps, which were produced in the office I was working in And they had to be clear. They're big poster maps, a lot of labels showing where is the oil spill? How close is it to Lake Michigan? Will it get to Lake Michigan? Will it be cleaned up? And it turned out this oil spill ended up being 25 miles long before they were able to patch the pipeline, stop the spill, and then clean it up. So it's really, you don't always get to see the users of your map. So this was a really kind of gratifying photo to come across that, you know you're going to make your map for some people, but you don't know who everybody that's going to look at a map. So it's pretty great to see map in the hands of these decision makers. Moving on to a project that I've worked on for several years, still on this theme of disaster debris. This is the disaster debris recovery tool, and this is a national data set. Remember I mentioned that map of landfills, and that's nice for one snapshot in time. We made a map. Good job. Thanks for that. But we really took the lessons learned from that exercise back in 2007 about the earthquake and started out in the Midwest, collecting this data, the data for where are the landfills, where are these different types of recyclers for electronics, metals, vehicles, as well as recovery type of facilities for composting, demolition contractors, and transfer stations. And these are all data sets. EPA has some of them. EPA has some of them. Our state agencies have some of them, depending on the state. And there really was no national data set altogether. So back in 2008, we started building on that idea. 2010, we published a Google Earth file of Region 5 data. And then the next decade, we worked on collecting this data, working with all of our regional offices around the country to collect this data and really get this data together in the hopes of sharing this. This is a public data set at epa.gov/debris recovery map. And this is a public data set, like I mentioned. You can use the website to search and look for facilities. You can add this data set into your own maps. And we have agencies that range from state agencies, tribal agencies, local governments that have used this data set. And I'll talk a little bit about those examples. Putting that data set into a geospatial format, adding the coordinates, lets you do a lot with it. I'm gonna take a drink of water here. And these are map tools that are pretty common now. If you've looked at maps or used interactive maps online, one of the things you can do is search for a category of data by location. And so what we've done here is use the search tool to look at the construction and demolition recyclers in Michigan. And by searching just by category, you can find there's 30 recyclers. And then by clicking on any data point, it gives you one of those pop-up windows. And this is helpful because it tells you, the contact information, it tells you the type of facility, and you're able to download that data as well. Another common feature of interactive maps now, and this wasn't the case, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but now it's pretty standard. If your data is geospatial, if you have those locational coordinates, we can do a search and we can draw a line. This was actually an emergency response that happened in Michigan in 2020. And we launched the national data set in 2020. And in Michigan, there was a dam that broke and flooded this river in Michigan. This is Midland, Michigan right here. And you're able to use this tool to draw a line along the river and say, I want to search within 25 miles of that line for any facility in this data set. And so it does a buffer and it gives you this output in under a minute. You can put it in an Excel spreadsheet. So really putting this data in the hands of emergency responders. A couple other examples how this data is used. This is one of our EPA emergency exercises where, again, once you have this data, it's collected in the right way, it's consistent. You can put it into maps, you can put it into dashboards like this. This is an emergency operations dashboard in Viewer from 2018. And you can see the data I've circled over here. This is the data out of this disaster debris recovery tool data set. The HHW is household hazardous waste. E-waste is electronics waste. And the landfills are also on the map. And just being able to make this data geospatial allows it to be put into maps and used in multiple ways. Another great example of this data set getting used is our staff that work with tribes, the Mille-Lac Band of Ojibwe in Minnesota. We've had our staff have put on several disaster debris workshops for tribes. I think it's annually for the last several years. And as a result of the workshop, they talked about the tool, and a lot of the tribes in our region across the country have their own emergency operations plan. They have their own emergency operations department. The coordinator was able to use the tool to look up the final disposal sites within 50 miles and put it in their plan. And you might think, well, that's pretty simple. Why couldn't they just do that when there's a problem or an emergency? And the whole point of planning is that you have this information ready to go. And the emergency, it depends on geography, right? What are the emergencies in Minnesota? Are those the same types of natural disasters or other types of emergencies as there are in Illinois or California? So those are the things that every local government is thinking about, every state agency is thinking about, and the federal government is thinking about. And so they practice and plan, and this data set was able to help them. One more example, and then we'll move on to some other maps. The city of San Francisco in 2019 had a full-scale emergency response exercise during Fleet Week. If you've heard of Fleet Week, it's got large Navy boats and a lot of military presence, and they wanted to plan and practice for magnitude 9 earthquake in the city of San Francisco. So what would happen if the big earthquake happened in San Francisco? And what would the debris be? What would the roads, if only certain roads or bridges were knocked down, where would all of that debris go? So they were able to use, this is right before we launched the national data set. The city of San Francisco reached out and said, hey, we heard about your data and we use it for our exercise. We want to work through the planning and it would be really helpful. So that was really great to hear that they wanted to use this data set for their planning purposes. I'm going to move to some environmental justice and community maps, which have been really fun to make over the years. And this is an example from 2009 of a map series I made for a grantee that we worked with. The city, wasn't the city of Gary, Indiana, but it was environmental and community groups in Gary. This was through an EPA program called the Community Action for Renewed Environment program. And it was a grant program for community groups, and it awarded over $12 million, as this poster says, to over 75 communities, giving them tools, technical support. And part of that technical support was the mapping of the data EPA has. And you might say, let's zoom in a little bit on some of those maps. And really gratifying part of the work is making these maps for public meetings and for technical assistance. So community groups, this is back in 2009, and think back to when were smartphones popular? When did they come out? We all take it for granted now, but a lot of this data was maybe at your fingertips on the internet, but it wasn't on your phone yet. And what can you actually see on your phone? You can't see a lot of detail if you're looking at a map and data. So I made these maps for the city of Gary, including, where are the companies that are releasing lead into the air? And that's what the map on the left is showing. And then the map on the right is showing where all the cleanup sites in Gary. And that's, again, those programs I work with, Brownfields program, corrective action cleanup program, and the Superfund sites. And then here the map in the middle is air sources. So, you know, a lot of times the EPA, you know, we're invested in putting information on our website, but we also care about the community and citizens and groups and the public at large being able to actually use the data. It's not enough to just put it on the internet. You've got to make sure people know how to use it, know how to get it out. And making these maps for public meetings really brings the data right to people up close and personal. And you can see this air sources map is showing facilities in pink that are releasing chemicals into the air. And then the yellow dots on the middle map are the schools in the area and how close are those and which schools are closest and which companies maybe are not in environmental compliance. So that's all data that's available on EPA.gov, but it's a matter of getting it all out. I'm going to move to these examples, and I hope you can see past this toolbar because it's kind of blocking my view here. But again, on this theme of environmental justice, if you're not familiar with the term, it's defined by the EPA as the fair treatment of all people, regardless of, you know, race, color, ethnicity, income level, etc. And so making data available, making sure people are protected in whatever community they're at, that all environmental laws are applied and implemented fairly and completely. So a lot of the data that EPA has collected over the years, there's now a tool called EJ Screen, and that includes demographic data about the population from the US Census. Things like what percentage of the population is people of color and what percentage of the population are low income, below a certain income. So this was another technical assistance project for our Brownfields program, and they were working with the near northwest area of Indianapolis, and it's just north of downtown Indianapolis. And as a part of this work, the nonprofit group was Groundwork Indy that we worked with. They had a grant from EPA. And it was, again, to make map series of these posters with different data sets, showing the community, here's the data that's collected and what's known about your community. And so I made this series of data. The map on the left is environmental justice data. Again, as I said, demographic information, and then environmental indicators, such as what is the percentage of housing built before 1960. And so that housing is more likely to have lead paint. In particulate matter, that's the amount of dust in the air. And the respiratory hazard index is related to the air toxics. So that was one of the maps. I'm going to take a drink of water here. Yeah, the map on the right is another map that we made using Brownfields data. Again, what are those sites? These are the circles over here on the right that were assessed for contamination and awaiting funding for cleanup. And then also on this map are the brown parcel blocks, and that's vacant or abandoned properties in this neighborhood of Indianapolis. So that's a challenge for this organization and for the community to look at how to revitalize this neighborhood. And then here's a data set some of you might be familiar with, is the redlining, the historic redlined areas. And that's a data set that's been published in the last few years by the University of Richmond. And it's a national data set. It's not for every city, but it shows the redlining that occurred where certain areas of cities were designated as hazardous, and they were literally given, as it says up here on the right side, they were given a grade of D on a scale from A, B, C, or D, and listed as hazardous or risky for mortgage lending. And along with that data set, for each, I think it's census tract, if I'm remembering right, are notes about the areas. And you can see the comments are just striking and shocking in some cases, but really gives you a sense of what is the historic disinvestment of those areas. So that's another data set that's become available and that the EPA is looking at. All right, let me move on here. A few other maps for the Northwest area of Indianapolis were focused on air quality and where are the watersheds. And again, what are those waterways around the area? What are the waterways on the outsides of the neighborhood? Are the water bodies impaired, meaning they're polluted or they're not cleaned up to a certain standard? Can people swim or fish in those waters? Those are concerns that everyone around the country has about their water quality. So this is using data from some of our websites, such as How's My Waterway is another great EPA tool that people can go in and type in their zip code and get more information about water quality. I want to finish up this map series showing health data, and EPA does not publish this health data, but this comes from the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. And so as a result of the community meetings, the nonprofit group we worked with wanted to share health data for the same area. And you can see this extent for each one is the city of Indianapolis. And the different, this is just a snapshot of some of the health data that's available. The asthma, diabetes, cancer, heart disease, high blood pressure, and mental health distress prevalence. And as a result of these maps, or as part of publishing them, we did include QR codes. That's now very common and standard on everything everybody sees now. I feel like even our news on TV has QR codes screaming out on the screen. But it's really a great way to share information. And for people who are maybe at this public meeting, they're able to take a photo and then take it home and share it with their friends, neighbors, family, community members. So I just want to finish up kind of the environmental justice focus of this is another example of maps that I've made for our brownfield staff and asking questions. Maps are always guided by questions. And this question in particular was, which brownfield sites in Minneapolis, St. Paul fall in those historically redlined areas where the people of color and low income population is over 80%. So you can ask those kind of detailed questions. And then my job as a map maker is to make that map. And so out of all the brownfield sites, which are the little white dots here, this one brownfield site here with the star is the one site. And so our staff use these maps for targeting more resources, prioritizing technical assistance. And, that's just the goal of working with data, being able to ask these specific and detailed questions. I promised to finish up. This is one more map. This is an interactive map that I made for our staff. And just to show, you can make maps on posters and paper, but interactive maps really let you dig in and get more information. So our staff are using maps like this to bring in all of that environmental justice data. And this is a pop-up about brownfield sites. I can tell you information about each site. But what I'm highlighting here is that you can link to different databases right here in one map. You can link to multiple other databases to get more information about the brownfields redevelopment, more information about the demographics and indicators around the site, and more information about the profile in EPA's cleanups in my community, which is another great online tool. All right, so I know I'm finishing up here. I'm almost done. I wanted to show an example of a story map I've built. And some of you are probably familiar with story maps. They're a really great interactive way to share information. I'm just going to go to the web page here. This is EPA redevelopment success stories. It's a very small story map I made back in 2020. And from beginning to end, it took under 30 days to make it, which is pretty fast, from concept to design to publishing, making sure everything, all the wording was correct, all the photos looked good. But we can put these in the chat maybe later so folks can explore. But these are 3 sites in Michigan that were former General Motors sites. And here in Livonia and Pontiac and Ypsilanti. And what this story map includes are great tools like a before and after swipe tool. And so this is a former General Motors plant. You can see kind of the outline of the old industrial plant. And it's now been redeveloped into, it's an Amazon fulfillment center. So, you know, formerly unused industrial land, it's no longer, it was cleaned up. It's no longer contaminated with any chemicals, and it's now a thriving business. And if you scroll down, you can see these other examples. The M1 Concourse is a really great redevelopment story where before it was an old General Motors former plant, and now it is a concourse for a racetrack. And if you have old antique cars or vintage sports cars, you can rent or lease a garage and you can take your car out for a spin. So this is definitely a Michigan based success story, as you can tell, you know, where we used to make the cars and now car enthusiasts and car racers can come and drive around. So I'll just finish up with that and get to my last few points. Yeah, so I said I would touch on some best practices. Besides making maps, I train our staff on how to use different tools, and that includes a lot of lessons on design and presentations and cartography. And there's so many best lessons learned and best practices that's a whole nother presentation. But it really, I would say it boils down to these 3 points, which is know your audience, maximize your visuals, and tell a story. And I hope you're finding that my presentation is doing that today. I know I've got a lot of content here, but it's really about, you know, what's the purpose of your map, your presentations. You want people to see things, really show them. Don't show them tiny little photos and tiny little maps and expect them to be able to read things that they obviously can't see because they're too small. But I would just say those are my highlights of best practices. And then I'm going to finish up by just mentioning a few things in addition to map making. Like I said, I do a lot of training for staff on map tools, whether it's ArcGIS Online, Google Earth, how to use PowerPoint. I've also been a mentor for interns, and some of those interns have helped us create and collect the disaster debris recovery tool data over several years. Couldn't have done it without them. And then Geo Mentoring, I just want to finish talking about that. It's been really fun. And it's basically going into schools and classrooms, whether it's kindergartners, 4th graders, 6th graders, 8th graders, high school, environmental science classes, getting them excited about maps, about studying the environment, about what is it like to work at the EPA. And then also getting them outside with tools like GPS units. And I'll show you a couple examples. I was literally in the middle of a presentation to a high school class, and there were a few teachers in the audience, and I could see some of the students are on their phones during the talk. And I said, oh, okay, I see some of you have your phones. Everybody get your phones out and let's go to this website. Let's type in your zip code. Let's find out about your community. So the teacher was, I think, a little mortified at first, but it was really great to just let the students know, hey, this is right on your phone. This information, these maps, you can get this right off your phone. And then I want to put a plug in for the Geographic Society of Chicago. They have this great floor map, and it's not computerized. It is literally a large floor map of Illinois. And this has been really fun with elementary school students, as you can see in this photo, they're literally playing a game of map twister on the map. And, taking this to conferences and letting adults check it out too. It's just really fun. It gets people engaged. And, I love, like me and all my colleagues, we love looking at maps for any reason, but giving other people a reason to look at maps is fun too. And then I just want to mention Story Maps is a great tool for looking and getting students involved, whether doesn't have to be a social studies class. It could be a literature class. It could be a science class, any topic. When I was talking to a class in 2018, Kilauea, the volcano in Hawaii, was erupting. And so we looked at a story map, and it was really fun and interesting to look at that. And, who doesn't like to look at volcanoes and maps about volcanoes? This is just another example from tubemapcentral.com. This is the Chicago L map done in the style of Frank Lloyd Wright. And so all those kind of cool design choices and color choices that come with map making are really on display here, and getting students excited about what map would they make? What colors would they use? And just all of those different choices kind of as designers that we get to make. And then this is a great example. You can see the city of Chicago. This is what happens when, this is a staged example of, I'm showing I think they're 6th graders at the time, how to use ArcGIS online and making their own maps. And they put a dot on the map for their school and a dot on a map for their house. And I said, okay, now pick the symbol. And what symbols do they pick? You better believe they pick the volcano symbols, the hurricane signal symbols, the bullseye. Who doesn't like to, imagine like you're your own map maker? And it just really got the students excited about making maps. So I have shown a lot of maps tonight. I hope you guys have gotten some insight into what does it mean to be a map maker at EPA. And I'm happy to take any questions, and thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucy. Your presentation just, reiterated just how important maps are, not only in environmental aspects, but essentially gathering information on any topic. And it was really interesting to see kind of how maps have evolved, because I kind of grew up at a time where it was all paper. The internet was kind of starting at that time, and that information wasn't like on a computer, granted a cell phone. So it's kind of interesting to see how it's evolved with all the keys and information and everything. All right, so we do have a couple of questions. We actually got a question early on in the presentation. Question number 1, how do you keep up with the changes to GIS technology since you started your career in 2005?
Yeah, it's definitely been through a combination of going to meetings, going to conferences. We use Esri products, so I go to the Esri conference kind of every other year. There's so much information at that conference. But I'm also part of the Illinois GIS Association. We have our own training conferences where I hear from other folks who are maybe developers or programmers or coders. They're at the forefront. A lot of students that are coming out of college now in the last 5-10 years, they have serious programming skills. And so I have not maintained or that level of high skill, but a lot of these interactive tools don't require coding, or you don't have to be, command line coder to use these products. So I would say a lot of conferences, a lot of training. I'm very fortunate that EPA supports a lot of training and makes that available for staff and allows us to go to these meetings. And then the internet, of course, you can learn everything on the internet, but do you have time? So it's also making that time.
Great. And this is another question that's related to the one that you just answered. But how do you learn how to make maps? Do you have to take college courses?
Yeah, I would say no, you don't have to take college courses. You could learn right now. There's open source software such it's called QGIS. There's Google Earth, Google Maps are another popular software. And a lot of my colleagues, when they say, someone asks me what do I do? What's a GIS person do? And then their next question is, do you just make maps like Google, or didn't Google make everything? So what's your job? What's the point? If it's all on Google and it's on everybody's phone. But as you can see, there's all this data and people are still needed to pull the data in different ways. So there are college classes, there's full degrees, there's GIS certificates that you can take. You don't have to be a geographer by training. There's a whole range of, there's people in business that have GIS certificates. So they're using it for businesses, for business location. It's not just like an environmental studies area or geography. It's not only in those realms. So there's a lot of ways to learn GIS.
Great. Okay, next question. Is the SONS SONS map available to the public? If so, where might we find it? And are SONS maps in real time where the public can monitor like fires and earthquakes?
That's a really good question. I don't believe the SONS exercise maps are collected and online in any way, but the disaster debris recovery data set that I mentioned that has those landfills and recycling locations, that is online and is publicly available. And I can put that in the chat for folks. That's on EPA's website. As far as earthquakes, I know the US Geological Survey maintains a data set, and you can see in real time where are earthquakes around the world. And that's the USGS agency versus EPA. We don't manage and monitor that data.
Mm-hmm. Great. And then this is another question that's kind of related to the one that you just answered. Are these applications available to the public or just EPA employees?
These applications that I showed, like the different GIS applications, a lot of them are free online, and they're free to schools and nonprofits, especially for all the geo mentoring that I've done. Those are tools like ArcGIS Online is available free to K through 12 schools and nonprofit organizations. And I can't remember Google Earth Pro, but those license terms, but those are also available, I believe, free. So yes, and then the data that EPA publishes, that is usually the disaster debris data set is available online to the public.
Great. All right. So at your EPA office, who gets to ask the question that drives the maps?
Great question. For me, since I support our staff, it could be our program staff who are engineers, scientists, policy analysts, my colleagues, and then all of our managers that are whether it's a section supervisor, branch supervisor, senior leadership, the top of our agency, and then across, we're always talking with our other regional offices, our headquarters office. So my job is to support the staff that I work with. So the staff are asking questions, but also if we get feedback from our partners or the communities we're working with, those are the people that get to ask the questions, because EPA is here as a public agency to help and work with communities.
Great, thank you. All right, so one attendee said, very interesting presentation. Do you have a favorite story map with interesting information about Chicago and or the EPA region that could be a good reference to, that could that could be good to reference during regional area travels?
That's a good question. I am always looking at the story map gallery and typing in like Chicago and Illinois and a lot of college classes now. You'll find story maps are made by college students. So it's not just experts or professors making these story maps, it's students as part of their class lessons. And so you can see the range of story maps where you can see maybe they don't have a lot of credits and sources listed at the bottom. At EPA, our story maps have to go through an official publication process, make sure all information is accurate. But I know for Illinois, there's definitely ones focused on history of Lincoln. I believe there's a Ferris Bueller's map. I love, any map, take a movie and make a map about it. Like, where did the character go? Or a book. So yeah, I can't think offhand of any other Chicago examples, but yeah, Great Lakes. There's so many story maps waiting to be made by students, by community members, by people wanting to share information. And yeah, I would love to know more about Chicago area and Illinois story maps.
Yeah, that would be really cool. I would be definitely interested in seeing the Ferris Bueller map for sure. All right, so it looks like those are all the questions that we received. Thank you to everyone who attended today's webinar. And also mark your calendars for exciting GSC events coming up next month. Next month's travelogue will be June 20th at 1 p.m. Central Time, and our presenter will be Derek Barthel, who will present on Malaysian Borneo. And then that same evening at 7 p.m., join GSC for a fun night of Geo Trivia at Leader Bar. Bring your crew up to 6 people per team and test your knowledge against local geo enthusiasts. To register for any GSC event, you can visit the GSC website, and more information will be under events. Again, thank you so much to our wonderful presenter, Lucy Stanfield, and thank you to all our members and viewers for tuning in tonight. Have a good night.